Writing your story because your story happened is probably an act of literature. You can write down. Building your narrative, again, is an act of leadership because it requires, you can write it, you can project it, but most importantly, it will require you to have the courage to take a step forward and go for it. Nobody else can do that for you.
Hey, Creating Maven. I'm Joy Spencer, your reframe specialist, with one important message. Your real work, it's not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. And what you create is what sets you apart and makes you incomparable. It's your legacy. I'm here to show you a whole new way of working so you can create with your gifts, make a unique contribution, and finally get paid to be yourself. This is Reframe to Create. What's it going to take to change the way you work? What's it going to take to change your whole life? I invited my guest today to come and share his work because I believe that what he does for his clients is the answer to these questions. Guillaume Wiatr is the author of Strategic Narrative, a simple method that business leaders can use to make everyone understand their business, get behind it, and believe in it. His company, MetaHelm, guides CEOs, founders, and business owners to align teams and accelerate innovation adoption. Great stuff, right? I first got to know Guillaume when I took a workshop he hosted to help business owners develop our strategic narrative by crafting 4 key stories: our origin story, our perspective story, our opportunity story, and our product story. What struck me about the experience is that this idea of developing a strategic narrative and knowing the difference between narrative and story is not something that's just for business owners and entrepreneurs. It's for everyone, and especially for professionals like you, my creating maven. A narrative helps you imagine what a better future looks like, and everything we're doing here at Reframe to Create is about helping you imagine and live a better future by how you are working and living. Guillaume has a model that I love that brings this work of story and narrative together in a workable and practical way. This episode is a hefty meal of that and so much more. So grab a glass of water, a pen, and a piece of paper, and jump right in. I started our conversation by asking Guillaume how his work on narrative could help someone like you.
Every human being in every group has a narrative, and every human being in every group of human beings has a story. Those are 2 different things. Stories are from the past. You've lived your story. It had a beginning, a middle, and at some point it has an end. Many stories, right? You have many stories, but you have one narrative, and your narrative is future focused. It's your way to operate. It's the set of beliefs that make you make certain decisions. And when you are in the work environment, if you're a professional, you always have the ability to continue to explore the narrative that feels right for you and for your team, for your group, for your organization. Hopefully you are working in a group where the narrative is clear, is impactful, it's exciting, it brings hope, and it is geared towards making an impact in a larger, broader community. But if that's not the case, the work that I do is here to call you to act and do something and wake you up and say, we need a better narrative. We need to change our narrative. If you have one already that is off because it's outdated, or maybe because the environment around you has changed. And this is your responsibility to do it. You don't have to have a job title that sounds like the job title of a decision maker. Everybody is a leader. Everybody is part of a narrative. A narrative gathers a group of people towards a common opportunity to create something that is greater than them. So that's the work that I do with organizations of all sorts. Doesn't matter if it's a small company, an early stage company, or an old big company, because a narrative, the concept itself of a narrative is grounded in the most human notion that every group of human beings operate under a narrative that helps them imagine what a better future looks like.
So what's an example of that? What's an example of a narrative?
There are so many around us. If you think about government, religious institutions, political parties, economic movements, societal movements, and of course private and public companies, non-governmental organizations. We they all have a narrative. This planet has a narrative. At the biggest level, humanity has a narrative. In my realm, I do strategy work. I work with companies who are interested in being more efficient. I work with companies who try to change the way we produce food, for instance. The narrative around food is the one of the dominant narrative around food here in the US is, if I think about a meal, is that it should have some kind of meat in it, right?
Of course.
Right. We don't even it's kind of, see, and that's another way to define a narrative. We don't even think about it. It's automated. It's unconscious, right? But if we start looking at what this creates to our environment, we realize that maybe we don't need so much meat. Maybe we create collateral damage in producing so much meat. And so maybe it's time to change the narrative around what's in our plate. Maybe we should eat food based on different kinds of protein. But however, we still love our meat. I mean, I love a good burger. I love great nuggets or a juicy hot dog, say, whatever, you name it, right? And so there are those companies you asked me for an example. There are those companies who are coming up with food that exactly looks like and tastes like meat, but it's not meat inside. So it's not, they don't call it fake meat. They call it meatless meat.
Yeah.
Which is and so it's a very important distinction, because it means that they are not against the fact of enjoying something really really nice and have a good dinner, right? But what they're changing is the way we think about how we bring that moment of joy, that tasteful food in our plate. What's the process? So that's an example that I draw from the food industry. If you look at tech companies, they are creating new narratives all the time about new technologies. For instance, one of the narrative that we hear more, and the new narrative that we hear more and more in 2021, there's really this emphasis on NFTs. The narrative around art was, I'm an artist. I have to used to only be about, I'm an artist. I have to have my pieces in a gallery, and then I depend on a broker, a middle person that sells my art. And now we're discovering that with NFTs.
And what is NFT?
NFTs are non-fungible tokens. They are a way to, I'll make it super short and super simple. They're a way to prove the original nature of a digital piece of art.
Okay.
Think about a file, like you have a PDF file, right? And NFT will make it unique digitally, electronically. This is possible through another technology called blockchain. I'll keep it at that. I'm not an expert, but there are people that are more precise, way better than me at explaining this. But today, what we're seeing is that I can create a piece of digital art and provide with a digital stamp that will allow you to buy my digital art directly from me. I don't need a middleman anymore, and you will retain the original propriety, the propriety rights only through digital mediums. And that disrupts the market. That changes the way, that changes the game, that changes the way we've always thought about art. So this is another example. These are big narratives. They have a huge impact on our society. But the importance of narratives is not necessarily tied to the size. It could be also something much more simple and a much smaller scale, and something that is really meaningful to you.
So it sounds like narratives, they're these big overarching ideas and themes that drive us to action, that drive entire industries to change and shift what they're doing. So something like the American dream, something that most people would connect to, is a type of narrative which draws people in to come contribute and put their own stories into it. So how you started answering that, and you said that at the beginning. I think you teased us with that everybody has a narrative, everybody can, but the examples you've given seem like these big things that have been created by other people and these, industries that's, potentially beyond us. How can a narrative be something that's accessible to a person, to us in our work, we already sort of feel we have a sense of control and access to our stories because those are ours, they're personal, we've lived them. But what is this narrative thing that you're calling us to pay attention to, and that you say that we can use and have access to?
Yeah, in fact, that's right. I use very well-known examples so that we can, from at the start of this conversation, so we can understand at what level I'm talking, and I use big ones, very dominant things. But within your company, you can look at culture as a narrative. That is a system of beliefs, a system of a set of behaviors that just happens because it makes things easier. It's not necessarily, a narrative is not always healthy, it's not always good. At some point, it has to evolve, it has to change. And so the conversation becomes, how do we drive that change? How do we move forward, right? But in my work, I help people rethink the way they operate as a department. I can think of a corporate client I have where I was, and I'm not going to put any name here because it's confidential, but try to be as descriptive as possible. They're trying to rethink the way they work internally, and the design department, really struggled with the marketing department, the finance department. They had a bad reputation, although that department had really brilliant people who really love their work and love to contribute and help their coworkers. But one of the things I helped them realize that they had not seen is that they were internally seen as an agency. Just to be brief, if you don't know what this means, is that an agency typically will work based on a work order, and will have processes that protect their margin because they are outside vendors, they are third party vendors, and that doesn't make any sense within internally within an organization. But because of the nature of this company, because historical reasons, that group was seen, although they were all internal colleagues, they were treated, seen, and operated under the assumptions that they would do work just like an outside vendor would do. And so that created immense tensions. They just didn't see it. Nobody could put a clear, simple explanation on this problem. And so I came in after many days of listening and analyzing and talking to them, and helping figure out where they wanted to go. We realized that we needed to change the way they just call simple things. It was all through language, and really talk about the old stories that got them to form this group. And then together we talked about the future. I asked a very powerful question that triggered a new description of how this company would operate within 3 years, and what a great new, better narrative should sound like in the future. Turns out it didn't take them 3 years. 3 years felt like doable,
Right.
but they actually changed quite quickly, because fundamentally we didn't change people. We just changed the way we frame how we look at the work we do. So we change words, we change people's perspectives, we reframe to create a new mission, and that had a profound impact on what I called the product dimension of a narrative, which is, what do we deliver at the end of the day? Well, concretely, what are the things that we do that quote unquote people will buy from us? Although internally there is no exchange, or there is no currency exchange, that we're not paying someone, we're all in the same boat. But you see what I mean? It's like, internally there are internal customers, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are they going to create?
Yeah, what are you going to create together? So that's another example of a smaller scale narrative. This is also applicable in your career. And I want to take my example to illustrate this. I was very early on, I knew I wanted to work as somebody who would help other companies. So that's called a consultant. In my early 20s, I thought this would be a good spot for me. And I've been a career consultant now for 23 years. Different capacities. And one of the narratives in the 90s that was really attached with this idea of being a consultant is working hard and having no life. And I started in a large firm within a year or two, I realized I still, although I love that job, that capacity of being able to explore things, being curious, bring an outside perspective to a different company was awesome. But I could see my older peers having literally no life, like working hours and hours and days. And I quickly thought there's got to be a better way. So I was pretty rebellious against that narrative. It's always thing that I took to heart, and I always wanted to figure out how to be a better consultant, bring more value to my client without ruining and destroying my life, while bringing the best of my creative talents, my imagination, my energy, my smile, everything. So that was one of the narratives I wanted to evolve for my own career. I started with this set of assumptions, social things that I borrowed from society, from my parents, from my friends, from my mentors, teachers, wherever they would come from. And very early on, I realized my career would be a departure from these narratives. And I was envisioning something different. At first, I wasn't quite sure how to call it exactly. So I decided that a big chunk of my career would be devoted to exploring and looking for new kinds of avenues, new kinds of work. So if you look at my background, it looks a little bit like a patchwork of things that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for some, but there is definitely a thread there, and this thread is through creativity, through personal expression. And my interpretation of what my own narrative should be like and sound like actually is now the core of my differentiator for my company. That's how I show up in the market. That's my reputation, that's my image. People say, Guillaume is a consultant that can deliver very solid professional work with a good touch of creativity. It's unique, it's different. He takes us where other people would take us with a with a more fun and joyful path, and sometimes the outcomes are even greater.
What you're sharing shows that for all of us, the first step is being aware of what narratives are influencing us and who we are and how we're showing up, and then questioning that narrative and and taking it to its full out extent. Because what a narrative does is it helps you, as you said, it's future focused. So there's an end point to it. So if you look down the road, where does this narrative lead and take me? Is that where I want to go? Being willing to be rebellious, as you said, put a stop, pause, or a pin in it or something, which is what I did as well when I quit my job, and then begin that process of exploring and testing out and trying out different things. I'm curious, what did that exploration, you sort of hinted to it about it being all sorts of, there were little creativity moments. What does that exploring look like? Because I know that that's probably an area that for a lot of people can be scary, and people can have a sense of, trepidation about launching out into that, especially when you're leaving one narrative and you haven't necessarily built the new one yet. There's that exploration piece in the middle. What is that like, and how do you navigate that?
These days there is a theme most of us have heard about: the great resignation. My great resignation happened within 2 years of the start of my career back in the 90s. I decided there's no way I could stay for 20, 30 years in the same company. My narrative was going to be purposefully made of a diverse set of experience with one common denominator, which was going to be impact. So I knew that I knew that my resume 10 years from that starting point would look like many different lines from the get-go. So that was by design, that was intentional. And I was always very clear about this. So when I was going to interviews and people say, yeah, we'd love to stay for you to stay here for a long time. And I was saying, I am on the look for different experiences. So I'll be very transparent with you. I don't know. Maybe 2 years from now, I'll tell you I want to do something different. If I can't do it with you, I'll go somewhere else. So just to be clear, because you deserve the right to know exactly who you're hiring. So it was one of the things I did, and then Another thing, another principle was risk taking for me, and I want to share a quick story with you. As a young consultant, I was about 29, and I was brought into a very large corporation because I had some knowledge, some technical knowledge about how to turn what we called product catalogs and make them digital. That was back in 2001, at a time where all companies were eyeing on the internet and the promise of becoming more digital, and they just didn't know how to go from paper to numbers to digital. So I was brought into this company, and I'm the first day. I'm supposed to be the guy, setting the agenda, driving the group, and having all the answers. This is also the narrative that comes with you when you're a consultant. Oh, we're hiring this consultant. He must know.
Yeah. Yes.
It's totally false.
Yes. The expert who can give all
The
the
expert.
advice.
Well, you know some things, but you have to be clear. There are many things you don't know, and so 20 minutes into the meeting, I realized, that group doesn't need my technical knowledge first. They need to know how to work together first. And had this very strong feeling, this very strong intuition that the meeting where we were having was not the right meeting at all. So how do you handle that when you are the person who set the agenda? And so I had this intuition that we should use something different. So this is what I came up with in a minute. I said, why don't we draw the project together? You don't seem to agree on what this project should do. They were, in short, they were trying to turn this, create this procurement system for a large organization. It was never done before, and so there was 20 engineers in the room with the head of procurement in front of me, and I said, let's draw the project. I handed, white sheets of paper, and I said, all right, everybody takes a pen, close your laptops, and just draw what you think the project is about. And they all looked at me with googly eyes and
I'm like, what is he talking about? Draw.
what is he talking about drawing here in this corporate world? We never draw. At the best, we sketch maybe a little bit on the whiteboard. They still trusted me. They followed because thanks to the consulting narrative.
Use that to your advantage.
Yeah, but I derail my own process. So that's my point here for our listeners, is being able to derail your own process and pivot quickly is so important. And being able to accept the discomfort of doing it at first, because maybe you've never done it before at a scale that is manageable, is the most urgent thing you can do to take control over your career and create a better narrative for yourself. So those people drew the project, and guess what? Not a single drawing represented the same thing, right? We posted this drawing on the wall. I remember there was this cloth wall with little pins, and the drawings did the rest for me. Everybody stood up and started looking at those drawings as a gallery, and with frowns on their face, and then all of a sudden, someone steps back and goes, "This looks like 20 different projects," and everybody laughs.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I think we should start there. Wouldn't you agree? And the head of procurement nods and says, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that before we go into technically fixing this, right, we have to agree on what we're trying to build together. So that was a critical moment for me. That's probably what I call my origin story for what I do now. From that moment, I knew I was able to have an impact on how people align, how people collaborate together, how to make them excited about something that at first feels scary or misunderstood. And that's tremendously valuable, in the work environment, but everywhere.
So there was something about what you shared about your, I guess it was as you described it, your origin story is familiar to what another guest of mine, Samuel Sarafel, shared a couple of weeks back about being mission-led and not job-led, and about being focused on having an impact and being focused on when you go somewhere, when you're thinking about your work and your role, you want to think, what is it that I'm here to do? What's the impact that I'm going to have? And that sort of is for him the driving narrative of how he approaches work. And it seems like it is for you as well. So my question is, And I'm curious, is there a connection between narrative and mission? Is that essentially, are they essentially the same thing, or are they different? Or how should we think about having a mission, or what your mission is, and what's your narrative?
Your mission is one component of your narrative. You have to be careful with the word mission because it comes with a narrative that is that a mission should be a statement, and that the statement is created before everything in one sentence that is clear and concise. That's what we kind of hear because that's how we've been kind of educated in the workplace. To me, a mission is the opposite of that. It's not just a statement, it's something you feel first. It's something that you build over time. Did I know what my mission was going to be when I was 21 or 22? Absolutely not. I'm still trying to refine it to this day, 20 years later. So if you feel like your mission is not clear, that you can't write in one sentence, it's okay. It's normal. It's the way it should be.
So it's something that's living. It's living that you're creating and developing as you go along.
Absolutely. It's an evolutionary process. It's something that evolves because who tells me that you're excited today for the same thing as you're going to be excited in next day or next year? I don't know. It may change. Your context may change. Your family situation, your personal situation, your health, everything could change. So you have to keep that in mind. But to your question, to answer your question, yes, your mission is one component of your narrative. What are the other components? So your mission is kind of the North Star, is like where you're headed, is the impact you want to have. But guess what? You're not the only one on this planet. And the probably another major piece of a narrative is what is other people's mission? What are they trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve? Because if you have a mission and you're really excited about it, but you're on your own and nobody cares about your mission, what's the point? Maybe at the beginning, maybe you have this intuition, but if you can't rally people, if you can't mobilize people with you, maybe you need to think twice. Maybe you need to continue looking for what really the collective aspect of your mission is about.
So it sounds like it's inherently collaborative and communal.
Yes, a narrative is, in the context of a narrative, a mission should be about a community. I have a model that I teach in my workshop and that I write about extensively, and this is the collective and external facet of your narrative. But your narrative is also very much personal and internal, as we developed before. It starts from something that triggers you to take action, right? It's something that either nags you or you get frustrated about or excited about. And for you, what could this be? Maybe it's something around human relationships, maybe something about technology, maybe something about education, technology, about peacemaking, about anything. And so you've got to look for this. So that's another aspect of your narrative. Those are the roots of what your mission, it might be. If I make a connection here, another dimension of your narrative is how do you go about this, right? And there's the in my workshop I take the example of a company most of us will hopefully recognize called Volvo. The Volvo cars. Volvos are now known on the market for being safe cars. Volvo is about security. I'm going to make the assumption that we agree on that. What's interesting is how this company started on this path, right? The president of Volvo lost a relative in a car accident in the 60s and they wanted to be known for, and this guy was really about family sports car. And from that moment, he realized our roads are not safe. And we are engineers, so our perspective, our mission will be to save lives, millions of lives. But our perspective is that it should be done through engineering. That's their perspective. That's what that's their vocation. That's that's what they're good at. That's what they can do best. That's what also matters to people. So you have to ask yourself the same question. Your mission is your destination, your North Star in your narrative. But how do you go about this? Maybe you have natural talents for something. Maybe you're a great educator. So if you want to change the narrative in the workplace, maybe it's through education. But there are so many other ways you could do that. You could do that through technology. Maybe you have an idea for an app, for a small system, something that you could at first kind of prototype and cobble together to prove that technology will help solve that a situation you're trying to enhance. Let me continue to brainstorm here. You could do it through also putting better policies in place. If maybe you're good at legal stuff and great at writing papers and documents. So see, I just gave you three documents, three paths here. That's the perspective.
Okay, my creating maven, I'm going to pause here because it's time to get your pen and paper. It'll make the next part easier for you to follow along as we dive into Guillaume's strategic narrative model and unpack the 4 stories that are part of it. You got it? Okay, take the piece of paper and fold it over twice so that you end up with 4 square boxes. In the lower left box, label it at the top with origin story. Then in the box right above it, which is the top left box, label it perspective story. Then the top right box, label opportunity story, and then the bottom right box, label product story. Leave plenty of room inside the boxes because that's where you can fill in some of the questions and notes and points that we discuss in each section. So this is going to help you as you craft your own. Now let's dive back into it.
The reason why I wanted to have you on is because you have this amazing model, and I love that you've touched on it in different aspects of this conversation. You brought up your origin story, you brought up the perspective of these organizations that they have, like Volvo. And so there are 2 other elements that are part of it, and you actually touched on it as well with the product story. So I want us to sort of just, workshop and think through how my listener can really get value out of these 4 different stories that make up this overarching strategic narrative, this narrative and the way that they should think about their work and how they want to change how they show up and operate in the world. So a starting point is the origin story. And that's what you shared about it's that beginning, middle, and end, that moment, that turning point that shares of why you've come to this particular thing or this new worldview that you're going to come to, why you care about this particular issue. And then the opportunity story is that new vision of the world. It's kind of like the aspirational story, like sort of maybe, I guess, the mission that you might have, the cause that you believe in, that you're looking to, and how you want to see the world be different. And then your unique perspective is, and this is where I get a little murky on this part, but it is sort of like your own particular world view of why and how we can make the world be different and how we can get to that point, how your own unique talents and really your unique perspective can help shape and shift that. And then the product story, how I understand that in the context of what I do here, it's what specific things that you're going to create. The specific, maybe it's a new policy, maybe it's an actual product, maybe it's an actual service, or maybe it's just the call to action that you bring people to. And all of these together sort of make up this new narrative or worldview or thing that you're taking and pulling through. Thoughts on this, and how can you sort of like expand on that and help us think through how we can use this model?
Yeah, and Joy, I built this model to turn organizations in sources of inspiration for people, right? That was my initial thought, and then I realized, well, it's also applicable at the individual level. But you always, so the first thing you have to realize is you always live in a community, right? So the origin story could be defined as, if I look at my life, if I look at my career, and if I only could remember one thing, one moment that really had a very strong impact on my trajectory, on what I do, what would it be? And at first, you might give it some thoughts and not find one moment, but a series of them, 1, 2, 3, maybe more. But as you continue to think about this, force yourself to, think about the one thing that if you could only keep one memory that you tell to your friends and family, what would that be? So that's what an origin story is about. It's really about helping you get, crystallize the essence of what made you, if I want, in your career, in your work environment. So maybe it was working with former coworkers, or the relationship with one of your bosses, or a client that you had, or one day you walked to work, or you attended school, one of your teachers, maybe it's a family, it's a parental relationship. Like, part of my own origin story was my relationship with my grandmother, who just passed away. She was a great entrepreneur. She was never known for that, but that inspired me, and I always keep that in my origin story. So that's what this part of my model is meant to do, is to help you always keep a connection with the DNA of your career. The metaphor I often use is, if your career is a tree, the DNA is in the seed, is in the quintessential little sprout of that tree when it was not a tree yet. It's just a little, thing that's was sticking outside the earth. And then the metaphor applies to your career. At first, you start with an idea, with a path, with something. Maybe you went to study, I don't know, education, and you realize your passion is in art. Or you studied finance like me, and this was my major, and I realized my passion is into people. Right. So that's what the origin story should do for you. That's what it should do for a professional. The opportunity, as you said, is really thinking about it, not just for you, but what is the impact you want to have in conjunction to the community you live in. What is the thing you want to improve, you want to change, you want to evolve? Do you want to, and one of the exercises you could do is write your own obituary and say, at the end of this life, well, Guillaume helped so many people do XYZ, or Joy help millions of people make better use of their own talent and believe in themselves to create a better work path.
Yeah.
So I'm trying that you would have your own better way to define your opportunity story. Maybe you want to share with us what it is.
Well, yeah, I think my opportunity story is that I want to see a world where people are able to create with their gifts more often than not, and that is sort of like the default way of working. That when you go to work in an organization or partner with someone, the question is, what are your gifts, or what is it that you typically create, or what have you created before? That would be the question, and that would be what people would be invited to do.
I think this is a great prompt right there. I might steal this from you, Joy. I want to see ... and for you,
Yeah.
it's a world where, and then you expand it.
Yeah.
For me, if I use your model right there, I would say I want to see a world with workplaces where people have more fun, can come as their whole self, and do meaningful work. That's something that I would love to see one day. This would be my dream.
The opportunity story is that it's a dream, and it's inviting us to dream together, inviting us to imagine something different together. And I to me, I see that as really the thing that really pulls. That's the thing that pulls people into action and into partnership.
Absolutely. And I work with people who have really great idea, brilliant solutions. They know so much about their what they're putting together, that they are stuck into explaining what this thing does, and they forget to provide the essential context that makes people excited for what is it that they do. They forget to say why this thing will revolutionize their world. That's what the opportunity story does.
So I'm always stuck on the perspective story.
Okay.
I feel like I never quite get it. Even though I tried to give it a description. So let me try it. I think that my perspective story on here, as relates to the podcast, is my perspective that you don't have to be a productivity hamster, that you can be a creating maven, and that you can get paid to be yourself. And is that my perspective? I guess that would be my perspective story.
It sounds very much like it. Why? Because you're not just saying what we should do, but you're also saying what we should not do. And so I always like to say that your perspective story is a great reason to disagree with people. It's your opinion. And if you never run into anyone that disagree with your perspectives, that probably means you haven't refined it enough.
So it's kind of where you're putting your stake in the sand. Like this is it.
Putting your stake in the sand. Exactly. So for me, my perspective was, very early on, that the work that I was going to help people do around me should be meaningful, should be simple to understand, should be exciting for people, should be clear. Whatever, and I have one of my principles is whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And that day in the meeting room where I was with those engineers, what did it take me? A stack of paper and some pens, whatever it takes. And if he had taken me to, I don't know, do a dance or mime or scream or whatever it takes, that's my perspective. So what is your, for our listeners, if you're listening today, what is your strongest beliefs on how you do your work? What is a yes? What is a no? Make a list, write a small manifesto if you want. That's how great organization, great groups, great teams work really well together. That's how they succeed. And you can play the same game. I'm thinking right now about sports team, right? Soccer teams, right? So I don't know why I'm taking this example, but the game is the same for everyone. Every team should play soccer by the same rules, but you will notice that some teams have different perspectives on that game. They will be okay with certain ways to play, and they will not accept other ways to play.
So it's also also your values. It is back to the stake
Yep.
in the sand. These are my values. This is where I will not cross. This is what's important to me. And
that's what's important to me, and that very often time that will be tied to what you can also do, right? It's tied to your capability. So other people will call the perspective story your culture. We talked about values. It's a belief systems.
So what about the product then? And this is where I feel like I drive my listener to be very tangible about their products, like to create an actual tangible product, service, experience, a particular project. But I know that there are other types of product that are not necessarily that concrete and that tangible. And so what are some of those other types of products that people can think about is when they're thinking about their product story?
I want you to think about your product as the material expression of everything we just talked about the material expression of your beliefs. So if you believe that a safer car will save people's life, then you should seek to build a safer car. One day, a group of people gather together and say, we need more cleaner cars. We need electric cars. That's the material expression of what we believe. We believe that this planet needs less CO2 emission. We are on a mission to save the existence of humanity here, because otherwise, if we keep with this CO2 emission, we're going to all die. Okay, what's our perspective? It should be done through engineering. We believe that electric vehicles will help. Electric, not just vehicles, but electric everything will help. And therefore, the product we're going to build is an electric car, not just an electric car, but the best electric car. An electric car that has the same range as a gas-powered car. I just told you the narrative of Tesla. It's not just one mission, as you could tell, right? You asked me early on if mission and narrative is the same. It's not just mission; it's a set of different things. So for you now, so your product, what should it be? So the material expression of what you believe, it should be something that helps people join you on your journey, join you on your movement, on your mission. It should be something that is accessible, that they can readily experience. So if you think that you should put a training together, you should develop a piece of software together, you should write a book, you should give a lecture. It could be an experience. It could be something that requires power or not. It could be anything. Really, that's where you get to really be creative, right? And maybe it's just not one product, but a set of products.
I like that. I like that your model gives us room to be creative, gives us mood to explore, and even just you helping me to think it's not just one mission, it's not just one story. Like there's so much more flexibility, and I think our tendency, mine included, is we want to know, okay, what's the one thing, or what's the easy button, what's the simple 1 2 3, or the model. Give it to me so that I know it's easy, it's clear, and I know that I got the right answer. And I think you're inviting us back to life is complex, and there's beauty in that. There's beauty in our are many different stories that make up our a big overarching narrative that we're driving and drawing to. And so we're being invited to that ongoing journey of figuring it out as we're figuring out what we want to create, as we're figuring out how we want to show up in our work, as we're figuring out all the different ways in which we want to be paid. There isn't just one roadmap or one answer necessarily, and that's a good thing, because I think we're often scared that we're going to miss it, whatever that thing is.
Well, the way you think about this whole system we just went through is absolutely meant for that. It's meant for creativity. It's an open system. There is a visual representation that Joy, because you've seen it there, that hopefully you can share with your listener. And if you look at this, I designed it as a 360 view of things, not just a linear model that goes left to right and 1, 2, 3. By now, if you've listened to this episode, you notice that I make a difference between story and narrative, and that was one of the things that annoyed me the more I studied the human-built, models around storytelling. All of the books about storytelling try to give you a template, try to give you a cookie cutter way to look at story. That's helpful in a way. It serves certain industries, like the movie industry, like Hollywood, or writers and things like that. But for building better communities and better companies, I think we need something that is more open, flexible, and more encompassing. And that's why I make this difference between story and narrative. Stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. Narratives have a beginning, a middle, but maybe not an end that you can see. Otherwise, it doesn't invite others. It doesn't leave the door open for others to join you.
Our lives are a narrative that we're living right now, right?
Yeah, but we don't know how it's going to end. Don't know how it's going to end. So I like your comment about being okay with not a template that is just too prescriptive, not the Mad Libs.
Yeah.
Like, let's move away from this a little bit. You can they are a little bit helpful. Like earlier I said, I want to see a world that ... Oh, it's okay. It's just a prompt. But let's move away from the templates kind of thinking.
Yeah. I see them as boxes to break out of.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's helpful. Oftentimes it gets you started, and oftentimes becomes something that you're like, oh, this doesn't feel comfortable. It feels too restrictive, but at least it gets people started thinking and started on the journey.
And what a journey it's gonna be, my creating maven. Are you ready for this? Are you ready to think through how you can build your own strategic narrative in order to reshape how you work? Guillaume shared great questions to start you thinking on this that I want to go over. First, think through your origin story with these. Ask yourself, if I look back on my career and only remember one moment that had an impact on my trajectory and what I did, what might that be? This question is to help you get to what Guillaume called the DNA of your career, the seed of your career. For me, I think about the story I shared in episode 8, Learn to Resist in Place, which is about the time when I went protesting for developing countries' access to essential medicines at the WTO Ministerial in Cancun. It was a seminal moment for me because I learned from my boss, Jamie, at the time, this idea that you have to create the future you want to see. You don't just wait for it. This idea of creating what you want to see has definitely been the DNA and seed of my career ever since. So think back for yourself. There may be many moments, but start with one and dig in. What is that story? Could this be your origin story? Second, think through your opportunity story. For this, ask yourself, what's the impact I want to have? What's the change I want to see? Try out this statement. I want to see a world where ... fill in the blanks. For me, I end this sentence by saying I want to see the world where people are asked what their gifts are first and what they create. A world where conversations around what people are creating with their gifts is the norm. Your opportunity story is your way of inviting us to dream and imagine the world in a different way. And another exercise that Guillaume suggested for creating your opportunity story is to write out your obituary. It's a way to write a future story of how you impacted and changed the world. I'm definitely going to take a stab at this exercise. Third, Think through your perspective story. Remember, this is how you put your stake in the sand. Think about how you see the world differently from the status quo in your topic area or whatever it is. What's the story that's an example of this? Your perspective is the different how that you think we need to implement in order to get to the new opportunity. As you heard, I kind of struggled a bit to articulate this one when Guillaume asked me, but I think I got it now. My perspective story or statement rather is your work is not your job or your career. It's what you create. I knew this. And I know it's a perspective story because not everyone agrees with me. I've definitely been challenged on this notion, but I've stood my ground as I know it's true. And I also know that this message is not for everyone. Your perspective story is your invitation for others to disagree with you. You can play around with creating it by writing a manifesto. This is your opportunity to vocalize your values. And what story shows this? Think of a moment when you were living out the values of your perspective. What happened? Fourth and finally, think through your product story. What can people do that shows they are bought into your opportunity story, that they're bought into the dream? For me, the best thing a person can do to show that they've bought into the reframe to create, ideology of your work being what you create is for them to actually create something, to bring something to life with their gifts. How about for you? What does a call to action to your worldview look like? Because what we've learned from what Guillaume has shared is just how important community and bringing others along is to our work of creating and leaving a legacy. It's not just about us and what we want to do, but it's about possibly movements that we'll build, but even if not to that extent, about the communities that we want to foster. After unpacking this model, I asked Guillaume what he wanted to leave you with. This is what he said.
I think what we talked about today is very much on the topics of leadership. And I want to reinforce that. Everybody is a leader. Everybody is a leader. Don't wait for the job title to tell you that you're a leader. And building your own strategic narrative is an act of leadership. Writing your story, because your story happened, is probably an act of literature. You can write down. Building your narrative, again, is an act of leadership because it requires, you can write it, you can project it, but most importantly, it will require you to have the courage to take a step forward and go for it. Nobody else can do that for you.
That's right, my creating maven. Nobody can do this work for you. And what glorious work it is. I hope you go back and listen to this episode again so that you can really get and unpack everything and all the goodness that we shared here today. To learn more about Guillaume Wiatr and to follow his work, visit his website, Metahelm, MATAHELM.com, and follow him on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I've shared his handles in the show notes. As you work and think through what we talked about today, I want to invite you again to the dream and great opportunity that is here at Reframe to Create. A dream to imagine yourself in a world where your work is understood as what you create, first and foremost. Dare to be someone in that world who takes on this perspective that your work is not your job or your career, but what you create. And because you dare to believe that, go on out there and create beautiful things and experiences with your gifts. The world can't wait for what you're going to create, and neither can I. Follow Reframe to Create wherever you listen to podcasts and share this episode with another budding creating maven. See you soon, creating maven. Until then, remember to always ask yourself, what will I create?